welcome to the Magoffin Home. Today is April the 16th, 2025, and this is a brain trust lecture. We're going to be having Joseph Longo speak to us today about the history of El Paso prior to its inclusion as a county in 1852. He's going to update us on that one. He's the expert. We're really excited to have him here. Before I tell you a little bit about my friend Joseph, I'd like to invite those of you who are interested in this topic. There are 3 wonderful things you can do in the next month that are also related. One is to attend this brand new exhibit in downtown El Paso at the brand new headquarters of Preservation, Texas. It is 6 blocks down the road, and it includes beautiful, high-quality photographs of many of the buildings we'll be discussing today, the adobe missions of our beautiful valley. Taken in 1936. So some really gorgeous images, including cute little kids in funny hats running around, bothering the photographer, and some wonderful information as well, original bricks from Socorro Mission. Furthermore, Joseph Longo, today's speaker, has put together a truly lovely exhibit on 2 important individuals, Morris Lowenstein and Judge Joseph Magoffin, who both contributed greatly to this county and have a lot of similarities. This exhibit is on display at the Mission Valley Association headquarters and is available on a regular schedule and also by appointment. So we hope that you'll see that and enjoy the work. And then one more note, we are continuing this theme next month at our next Brown Bag Lecture, where we will be having an elder of the Piro community coming to join us. Magda Moelia is going to be speaking about the history of the Piro people, and unlike this presentation with a PowerPoint and photos, hers is going to be a much more of a storytelling experience, so I think it should be fascinating even though it overlaps. Now let me introduce our speaker, Joseph Longo. Joseph Longo is a long-term volunteer of the Magoffin Home State Historic Site, where he is also a board member of the Casa Magoffin Compañeros. He has just been taken over as a vice president for our organization, for which we're incredibly grateful. He's also a master's of museum studies and a member of many of the organizations here that speak history. I'm not going to list them all because I would obviously leave somebody out. And without further ado, Mr. Longo.
Okay, I'm just focusing on Josephine Gasco ponytail because that's where the camera is. So, okay, so welcome you all. I'm glad I see a lot of new faces, and I'm glad. So today I'm going to talk about a lot of the history before El Paso, as we know it, where it developed. As we know, El Paso incorporated in 1873, and it really developed. We started to grow in the 1880 when the railroad came. But I wanted to focus on some stuff before that, you know, the development of the missions in the Mission Valley and also the formation of El Paso County. Now I am involved with the Magoffin Home and the Casa Magoffin, but I'm also here though on behalf of the El Paso Mission Trail Association, which our mission is to preserve the missions and the Presidio in San Rosario. Do not call it a mission. So they'll throw you in the old San Rosario jail, but it is a Presidio, and I'll explain more about that. But we also conduct tours mostly to school age group, but also we're willing to do it to other groups as well. We have exhibits, we have art exhibits at our visitor center, at the Mission Valley Visitor Center, which is part of the Nesta Valencia bus terminal on 9065 Alameda, across the Isleta Mission. And one of our other board members, I'm a board member, Laura Ramirez, is here today as well. So I'll talk more about that. Now, another reason I wanted to talk about this subject was also to try to connect our history to the Magoffin Home, to this area, and also to promote our exhibit that we're having on Lowenstein and Magoffin, which I'll talk a little bit about toward the end. So, this image here is Rio Grande to the mountains of El Paso. And this came from this website here, which have a good source about this sort of history. And it came from a circa 1850 lithograph. And this is when the Spanish came here. This is Don Arnate, and I'll talk more about that when he came in 1598. And this is what they named El Paso del Rio del Norte, and the path that was served at the Spanish doorway to the west. And I'll talk more about the name. But this is, I think, a really good image to show how El Paso was, or how they perceived El Paso was when they first came. So going to that, oops, yeah, there we go. Here we go. I start off talking about the Rio Grande, because of course you know that's a big part of El Paso history, a big part of our culture, of who we are. Not just El Paso, but the whole area. So when the first when the Spanish settlers were coming here, the river, of course, as you know, were quite different than it is today. It had a wide floodplain. It had wetlands. It had meadows. It had the fish and animals, and including the jaguar were there as well. And of course, you had the native groups, such as Mansos and the Sumas, living there as well. And the river, of course, offers substance to the natives, and also when they with the adobe structure, which was really the first type of construction in this region, it provided materials for that as well. So the river had played a big, important part. But the river was also a turbulent, always changing directions and also destroying stuff in its path. And, we do know in the 1700s and 1829, they destroyed the Isleta mission. And I also believe in 1829, they also destroyed the Presidio Chapel. It also damaged the Socorro mission and one of the floods as well. And it also had effect in this area as well. So it wasn't until they built the Elephant Butte Dam that they stopped the regular flooding. Now also the Rio Grande, that these changing of the boundaries contributed to when the treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed in 1848. That put El Paso and Isleta, Socorro on the boundary for the United States. Previously, before the flood of 1829, we were on the southern bank so we were in Mexico. But then, because of that change, we ended up on the northern bank. And based on the treating, it was the deepest channel. And so we ended up on the United States side. So that one of the things that happened with that, the river contributed to this. Major geopolitical boundaries change. So that's something about the Rio Grande which I wanted to talk about first, because I believe that it was important to talk about that. So one of the things people always ask is the name, El Paso. So I'll get this right eventually. So El Paso del Norte denotes the historically significant geographical point, the channel cut by the Rio Grande through the mountain to form a natural passageway for travel to the north, south, east, or west. And this point had already been established by the Rodriguez Sanchez, also called, and I apologize for my Spanish pronunciation, Sasamurucaru Exposition by 1582.
Chamuscado.
Chamuscado. Thank you. I'm going to be looking to you. So the early appearance of the name shows in prints as early as 1610. and you had a poet, historian of the Oneida Exposition of 1598. So when Juan Onate and 500 colonists crossed the Rio Grande near what is now Hacienda Cafe, on May 4th, 1898, they named the fort El Paso del Rio, that photograph. To think of that photograph, the pass across the river, and this became the primary gate to Mexico for 300 years. So also, when I was talking about the Rio Grande River, I'm going to be passing this binder around, because this from the Mission Trail somebody collected, and has some articles, Mission Trail, but they also have some copies of some of the past exhibits they did on the different missions and some of the priests. So when I talked about the Rio Grande and I wanted you to imagine about how the river were like, just think of, I don't know if any of you been to the Rio Bosque wetlands near Socorro. I know it's sometimes hard to get to, but I encourage you to go down there because that's how it used to look. And they're trying to, and since the 90s, they have been trying to get to that, back to that look, back to its roots. So I encourage you all to go down there and to think of, when I talk about how the river looked, think of that. So what is the Mission Trail? And I'll be talking about the Mission Trail because the Mission Trail is a segment of the historical El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro. And it's basically it's called Socorro Road, FM 258, and El Camino was known as the Royal Road, which stretches more than 1,500 miles from Mexico City to north of Santa Fe. And it was used for trade for the natives, but also early American and European settlers. And it's the early American route in North America and is a National Historical Trail in 2000. And here is a picture of the trail. As you can see, we're going to be talking first about the Guadalupe, the mission and Juarez. And this is Camino Real, and these are some other mission settlement that was established around the same time in the mission that we're going to be talking about. And these Isleta, Socorro, San Rosario. Okay, so as I talk about El Paso with the name, this is El Paso as we know it, the city of El Paso, because it really, El Paso, the city of El Paso started off as very small settlements, as we know it, really downtown you had Franklin, which later became El Paso, downtown, and you had Concordia, you had, of course, Magoffinville, you had Hart's Mill, and that was formed El Paso, the city of El Paso as we know it. But for a long time though, until probably the railroad started to come along, San Rosario, Socorro, Isleta was bigger because they had a more concentrated population were down there because when El Paso County was formed in 1850, San Rosario was the first county seat. Magoffinville was briefly, but then mostly bound to San Rosario, to Isleta. So all the main business were down there because of population. So you had the courthouse, the jury, people who went on the jury went down there, all the businesses. But really all the population had already been established, even when it became part of the United States. And it wasn't until the railroad came along that boosted El Paso, and railroad did pass through Isleta, and it provided a connection between Isleta and El Paso. It bypassed San Rosario, which contributed to San Rosario's sort of decline of being, it used to have the most population of everybody in El Paso. But like I was saying with El Paso, you had in Franklin, which eventually became El Paso, and of course, as you know, Paso del Norte was El Paso. And there was a merchant named Benjamin Coons, and he came to El Paso, and Ponce de Leon, he was the one who, in 1820s, he got a land when the United States, when Mexico became its own country, he got a land grant for that area. And Coons, ran some of the land and then eventually bought it. And he had a post office, and he's the one who also rented it to the U.S. military in 1848, believe. So that became where you had the first military base was. Then eventually, when they left town, that hurt Coons, and eventually became Smithville. And eventually he got Anson Mills to come along and do the first plan for El Paso. And he used El Paso. So Paso del Norte changed its name to Juarez in 1888. So that I did talk a little bit about that because that had to do with the home name of El Paso. So, now fast forward back. I know I'm taking you back and forth here, but let's go to the 1580s. And the first exposition that was really, that is recorded to actually be here, even though there are suspicions about others, was the Rodriguez one. And then you had another one that took long after in 1583. And you had, like I was saying, the Sumas and the Manos were living here along the Rio Grande. And the Mansos were living in proximity to El Paso, north of La Cruz, where the Sumas were living southeast of El Paso in parts of what is now northern Chihuahua, Mexico. Now the Spanish were the one who named the Manos because they apparently when Onate came, the first word they told them was the first word they said meant peaceful ones and friends. And they were known for their deceitful red plastered hair, and the Suma were known for their tattoo of painted faces. And this is, I believe it's still at the Museum of Archaeology, but this is sort of an artist's rendition. And they ate mesquite, they fished, they might have practiced some agriculture, but mostly it was holoculture, but mostly it was, they hunted. So I talked about that Juan Onate a lot, and this is, he came in 1598, and this is a quote from our El Paso Mission Tourist Guide, which is on their website. We also have brochures as well. But there are more than 80 carts and wagons and thousands of head of cattle formed a caravan about 2 miles long, and the caravan traveled to a northerly route for weeks across the Chihuahua Desert until it reached the banks of the Rio Grande and the vicinity of the present San Azario. And on April 30th, 1598, Onate called for a rest and celebration, and the Spanish were joined by the local Mansos Indians, and together they held a mass and enjoyed a Thanksgiving feast before the Pilgrims. Now there is a group in Florida who claims they were the first, but it did 33 years before the Pilgrim feast of Plymouth, Massachusetts. And Onate performed the ceremony of La Toma, which was an official taking possession in which he claimed new providence for King Philip II. And the Spanish, Onate had heard stories, they had heard stories of there was wealth and riches in northern Mexico, and this expedition led to the founding of Santa Fe, which became an important center of the Spanish colonial empire for trade. And this is a famous painting by Jose Cineros of of La Toma, and it was in San Rosario. I think I'm getting it now, Danielle. So in the 1650s, Spanish priests began their conversion of the Manos, Sumas, and Azanos in the region. And in 1659, we talk about here the two missions in the Presidio, but also the mother mission is the Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe del El Paso, Our Lady of Guadalupe at the Pass, for the Manos and Juarez. And the larger structure was built in 1662, and it was established in 1659 by the Manos. It was built by the Manos, and is still standing today downtown. I don't know how many of you have been there. But it remained the oldest structure in this area, and it was the first mission built in the region. And this is a mural here. And we have brochures that were done with the community foundation, and they worked with everybody involved. But I think the Magoffin Home ran out of it. But if you're interested, I can probably get you a copy. But it had this painting. And like I was saying, Juarez was known as El Paso del Norte until 1888. And until 1692, the Paso del Norte was the northernmost part of the colonial Spain. And so this is sort of how it looked today, and this is from an artist rendering. I believe the 1850s or 1840s. Now this one have a date. Yeah, this is our good friend John Russell Bartlett, and the reason I'm saying our good friend is because he went to Magoffinville. He was part of the Boundary Commission, and he stayed at Magoffinville. They do have a painting of him that the Magoffin family had. They donated it, but one of Joseph Magoffin's granddaughter was a friend of an artist, Leola Freeman, and she painted sort of a reproduction of him. So, and he's currently in storage. But he was also he was an explorer, and he liked he painted. Like many American early settlers, they never seen El Paso, something like El Paso before. And they met the natives, and many of the early loved the culture. They married women. And so this is just one of his paintings of that mission in 1850. So, the three missions in the Paso. So the Isleta and Socorro mission was established during the Pueblo Revolt in northern New Mexico in 1680, when the Pueblo Indians, which I believe go back to 1500 AD, they revolted against Spanish rule, and you had Spanish and refugees who came here. Nearly 2,000 Spaniards along the 100 of Tigres and Piros refugees came and settled in today Juarez region. And settlements along Isleta, Socorro, and then you had Senecu and San Lorenzo. And these missions, Senecu and San Lorenzo, ended up on the south side of the river, and they are near the Juarez mission. I know some of the Senecu settlement ended up on El Paso side. So there is a mark on Alameda where, I don't know if many of you know, it's the old Isleta district headquarters, where Plato Academy is. There's a marker. And it's also Escalante area. The San Rosario were built later in 1789 to defend Spanish interests. And not just in the area, but northern Mexico, because they realized they needed to establish a series of forts throughout northern Mexico. So the Presidio was established on an old farming settlement formed by the Ortega family, which were part of the Spanish refugees. So the Islamic mission, now called Mission Corpus Christi de San Antonio de la Isla del Sur, were built by the Tigres. The current one were built in the 1850s. This one, you notice the dome here, the church, the dome here, and this came after the fire in, I believe, in 1907, 1908. And this was added in 1898. And there was a fire because, as I was saying, the missions were washed away by that flood. But there was a fire because they had a problem with the bats in the belfry. So the caretaker, and Frank wouldn't do this, our maintenance manager here, but the guy decided he mixed a bucket of chemicals and he left it there. And it catch fire and the belfry collapsed. So they rebuilt it using some of the walls. There was a sacristy there, and there was the statue of Jesus, of Christ interned, that they also rescued, and the bell, they're buried now in the front. You can't see it, but this one, is really, it has similarities to the New Mexico kind of style. Some of the missions you see there, really, the design, there's not a lot of focus on the sort of outside exterior design, really minimal. I always like the windows, the round windows. The current bells are from the 20s, but they have a mechanic bell, really. And one of the things, when we bring the kids there, the kids can ring the old bell. Some of them have a hard time reaching it, though, for good luck or whatever, So, the Islamic mission, the first one was established in the first permanent one was built by 1692. But like I said, in 1680, they had a mass in a temporary structure made out of reeds, and then the next day they had it at Socorro. But the Islamic mission, of course, the Tigre, they built it. The Tigre Reservation was established in the 1690s, 1680s, and the diocese owned the church, but the Tigres had contributed to its major reservation. So this is how it looked. This is from the 20s. This might be from the 30s or also from the 20s. I could not find the description of it, what year it was from. This said it was from the 20s. And this is really personal to me because my mother's side of the family, this was their church. So this is how it is now, and major renovation in the 90s with the Tigre. So they also put some of their culture too. So you have a combination of the classic church design, but also combination with the Spanish territory, that Spanish style, but also with the Tigre culture too. You have St. Anthony, who was, at one point it was called St. Anthony, but the Jesuits, they decided to remove him from the center, and it became dedicated to Lady Mount Carmel. So eventually they moved, because they built another, in the 60s, they built another church, Lady Mount Carmel, so they moved him back. And you could see there's some of the elements that are from the Tigre culture. The rain cloud baskets were there. There are corn stalks here. We also have the first Native American saints here as well. And we try to showcase that during our tours as well. Okay, so this is the La Purísima Socorro mission. People also call it Michael, because it also does sing there is Michael, St. Michael. Now, these names came from the Mother missions in Mexico. Now, Isleta, the one near, I believe it near Albuquerque, spelled with an I. Okay, and in that language, they differentiate between the two, the Y. So also, Socorro too, that came from their mission as well. And so, another thing I forgot to mention, you probably also heard of the island, the island. And the island began in 1829, the river, went between, the community, sort of separating them. So that why, and they were called little islands because of the separation. So this is a Socorro mission that goes back to 1843. The first location, they're not sure where it was. The second location washed away in 1829, and the state recently acquired the archaeology site of that location. And the Piros, there's still some descendants around, but it's not like the Tigres. They married a lot into the Spanish, and and many people thought that would happen to the Tigres, but then the Tigres were able to preserve their culture. But today, though, the Piros are the people in Piro Socorro are researching their history and are really trying to get their culture and say this is who we are and this is Socorro history. And we're going to have one of them talk the next time, so we'll have her tell you more. So this is one of the former president of the mission, right? This is his favorite mission. And as you can see, this kind of adobe is similar to here, how the house built. And with the Isleta mission, you notice the vigas are covered, but here you notice they're exposed here. And this is from maybe the 40s, the 30s, but this is how it is now. And you can see the vigas, the gorbals here. The gorbals have different symbols, and Madre will tell you more, but of the Piro culture. And in the front, it also seem to have seem to be also inspired by the Piro culture. So even though they converted the Piro, the Tigres, and other native groups, they still preserve aspects of their culture, which is still alive today. So also, this is one of the things our president does is also talk about, this is where he can show it's facing east. Church traditionally faces east and shaped like a cross. So for the kids, that's something the fourth grader, they get bored very easily. So good to show them, have something visual. And these are some other pictures here, probably the 20s or 30s. And this is my favorite, this is from the 40s. And again, my grandfather, my mom's father was from Socorro, so that's also something personal to me as well. And this is the San Rosario Presidio Chapel. This one, I believe, was built in 1877. And it was, now, people sometimes call it mission, and we always had to explain to the kids and others why missions were there to Christianize the natives. But the Presidio, the chapel was part of the Presidio, the army base, the fort, and it was for the families of the Spanish. And so that was something we talk about on the tours. So this is the inside of it now. And in the 1930s, there was, I believe, fire inside, and the ceiling, they put the metal tin ceiling here. They also covered the wooden columns here with the decoration. And it's really amazing when you go in there. what do you call that word? You don't need a microphone. They're just saying you can hear yourself. So, so they also have a tribute that are back to the many young men who served during World War II as well. And also around it in a plaza, a community have grown. And that is really, it represents sort of a plan, a really classic kind of plan of a Spanish town, a colonial town. So I encourage you to go down to the Mission Trail. Okay. So, sorry if I'm going a little fast. There's a lot of history, you know. And this is just an overview to try to connect this to here, because, you know, you're here in a Magoffin Home and you get so distracted with their history, you have to realize that everything is connected. And so I did research best I can, and if anybody from the Magoffin Home want to correct me, to try to find some Magoffin connection to this area. And I know that James Riley Magoffin, and I can go on all who he was, but James Riley Magoffin was the one who established Magoffinville. He was Joseph Longo, his pictures in his fancy room at the piano here. But he had owned land between Magoffinville and San Rosario. Joseph Magoffin, when he first came here, bought land in San Rosario. Him and his wife Octavia sold it in 1869. They bought it to a sheriff warrant, sheriff sale. Also, one of James Riley Magoffin colleagues, Jose Cordero, lived in San Rosario. There's also one of the early American settlers who come to Sutter was a guy named Price Cooper, and he had a lot of descendants. And Price Cooper, he worked at one point for James Riley Magoffin, and he came here before we became part of the United States with Sterling Price during the Mexican-American War, and he stayed and he slept. He fell in love with a Mexican woman. And he later became he had a stagecoach, and he would guard his stagecoach from the Apaches. And there's a lot of story about him. So also they had a little farm here, sort of, and they had a cow. And there were oral histories of one of the Joseph's granddaughter Mary talk about that they would send a cow to Slatter and they would trade the cow. We don't know too much about that. So there are some Magoffin connections, and so the exhibit that we're having at the Mission Valley Visitor Center is about Lowenstein and Magoffin, and the Lowensteins were sort of like with the Magoffins here. They to here, they were like that in East Slatter. They owned a lot of land in East Slatter. He came here, and I think probably 1850s, 1860s. He was a prominent merchant. He ran his own mercantile store, and our association, Mission Trail Association, the Mission Valley Visitor Center, which is owned by the city, by Sun Metro, is that building. It was built in 1875, around the same age of this, probably between 1873 and 1875. And that's where the exhibit is. But Lowenstein and Magoffin probably knew each other. There was an article about them being at the Democratic Convention. He was treasurer. Magoffin held county offices. Both families had sort of a different culture. Their family were multicultural. Joseph Magoffin was half Mexican, and Lowenstein was Jewish, and he was an immigrant from Germany. He fell in love with Juana Buchanan, who father James Buchanan. He came actually from Delaware, Connecticut, and he came here to Mexico and became a citizen and became Mexican council in Juarez. And he married, she probably was a cousin of Porfirio Diaz, And he Juana also was born here in Franklin, before it was El Paso. So he converted to Catholic so that he could marry her, and they married at the Isleta Mission in 1873. So, and he also, like Magoffin, they were landowners, they were supporters of education. Magoffin was on the school board. Lorenstein was also on the school board in Isleta. So there are some similarity between the two. So this exhibit, of course, working with the Magoffin Home and TAC, and it runs until August, and we have some items generously loaned by the Magoffin Home. And one of the things I wanted to end off with, well, before that, this is a courthouse, Paso County Courthouse, and I talked about how Isleta was a county seat. They became a county seat in 1871. Like I said, the railroad really had a part in the declining influence of San Rosario. And Isleta and them were rivals. So Isleta became the county seat, but they didn't have a courthouse really until 1882 when they built this building here. And it was on the location of the old Isleta Elementary on Alameda until they tore it down. It was really small from the beginning and really, but the problem was that they didn't get to be the courthouse too long. Because in 1883, Isleta lost the county seat election to El Paso. It's really a controversial thing, but basically El Paso stole the seat from Isleta. People could reveal that. There were more voters, because there were more people who voted that actually lived in El Paso. And it was pretty clear, and people from Isleta were trying to go down and see what was going on, but they kept being chased off. One guy named Ward Blanchard Street is named after him on the west side, he said there was proof in his ledger at the bank. So he was going down there, but then somebody pulled the book from his fingers and threw it, and it was wet, it was muddy that day. So the book wasn't helpful anymore. So there were more voters than actually lived in El Paso. And there were stories that there was this guy they hired. He was a traveling, maybe a miner, and at one point he had a beard, and they took him to another voter precinct. They shaved the beard, they made him look different, And of course they got voters from Mexico, but it wasn't. Voting laws were sort of different. Immigration laws, they could take these people and get them to swear allegiance, and they could vote. So it wasn't necessarily illegal that they were doing that. So it was sort of a different time back then. So basically, Isleta lost. San Rosario support San Rosario did because they had the rivalry. But Isleta still benefited, and they still grew because of the railroad, but not as much as El Paso did. So El Paso grew because of the railroad, and Isleta still hung on like it does today. But this was torn down when they built the school, and the bricks were used to build the school. Unfortunately, that school that was opened in 1915 was torn down in the 90s. And currently the district decided to sell the property. There was numerous structures built. There were some structures built later on, and it was used for Robert F. Kennedy pre-K at one point, but because the district decided to sell it, but some of the buildings had asbestos, and they realized, well, it might be better if we could clear the property. So they cleared it. So right now there are some vacant lots. So if you're interested in vacant lots, please see what's going on down there. So this is a picture of an early, probably not the first commissioner court, but this is an early commissioner court. This is accredited as such in Digi from the History Museum, but Lorenstein is here somewhere. He had a beard. He had a really beard, but all of the men had beards here. But these are a lot of prominent names. Judd Frawley, Jose Maria Gonzalez from East Letter, Jim White from El Paso, who was the sheriff, Manuel Flores, Rogers from El Paso. All these men probably knew Magoffin anyway. So I talk about the home, our visitor center on 9065 Alameda. I've got between two homes here. So this is the early picture of our building in 1914. This is old man Lowenstein out the porch here. And the area had, like El Paso, gone to major change to urbanization. So this is 2010, the visitor center opened in 2010. And they purchased the Lowenstein home and they restored it to follow the city historical, the East Latter historical, because we are in a historical district like the Magoffin Home. And the home, so the the Lowensteins, they had 11 children, okay? Joseph Magoffin stopped after 2. So they had 11 children and they all had, they lived near the area, they had their own children, had their own history to tell, and they all in the exhibit. I wanted to include as much of their history as possible as well. But then this became a commercial property. They divided it into 3 portions for commercial, and there was a rear and a back. And then in the 50s, they added all these fake facade, fake vigas, which I guess were popular at the time, and all this to it. And they did remove some of that when they were restoring that. And this is how it looked when they were doing construction. They tore down another building, and they tore down another building that were next to it. But that building wasn't really older. This building was. But this, they wanted to preserve its home because it's an important part of East Latter. And we are working to. We have some project ongoing. We're working with an intern from Texas Tech who is working on a brochure of some of the district. And some of the buildings in this area are in deterioration. And we hope to have more education and more awareness to try to preserve some of the buildings and the history. Because so many buildings had disappeared, such as El Paso. And it's important to keep these historical landmarks because many people come to this area like Magoffin Home and they remember the times. And there are also a lot of possibilities with heritage tourism and readaptation of building use. The visitor center is a great example of readaptive building. So this is how it looked today. And we're right across the Carl Jr., which used to be a gas station. And this probably used to be where Lowenstein's shop was, and now a driveway. And there's several buildings across it. I don't have photos. It's on deterioration, including a Brooks Hotel that were designed by Trost. So this is our visitor center here, and this is where you can contact us. And we do have a website. We're on Facebook. Now, this is where I talk at Magoffin, not at Magoffin, as a mission trail, not Magoffin. We are, it had to be approved by the city, but we are raising funds for a mural that will be on a non-supporting wall, not historic. There are other murals in the district, including Lady Guadalupe right across it. So we are raising money for this mural, and this is our goal. So we are asking, starting off $20 to $50. So if you want to donate, let me know, or they look us up and contact us. But this is we want to do this. This was sort of a vision of one of our former presidents, Shelby McHugh, because he believed that it will help our organization, but also will help the neighborhood around it as well.
Is that the design, or is that a design?
That is the design we will use, and it by Robert Dosal, who is a well-known artist. He's from Isleta. He's based in San Rosario, but he is a well-known, he is an experienced mural artist. Again, we're going to go in front of the City Historical Landmark Commission, but we do have support from Sun Metro. So we hope that this mural, again, will help us in Isleta. We care all about the Mission Trail, but particularly the neighborhood around us, we want to do some good there as well. So lastly, these are some of the sources I used. Magoffin Home Archive, and to give you a little, if you guys are interested in researching about the Magoffins, let Danielle know. And yeah, and that conclude the lecture. Do we have any questions, comments, complaints?
Or would it be that picture that you put up there?
Oh, I forgot about that one, huh? Well, this one, and I may ask a phone for a friend here, you or Ron, or this is a Cordova here. It's the Cordova, which was sort of, many of you heard about the Chamizal, and this is sort of when Joseph Magoffin was mayor, he was involved in that. Again, it had to do with, the river was changing, and it had to do with different disputed property between the United States and Mexico. But I brought this map because this was given to me by a friend, because it will show you the different, these little yellow lines show you the years where the river was and the changing. So you see here, like, you know, I can't see the year.
This one's like 1827,
Yeah.
1853, 1881, 1885.
Yeah. So that's why I brought it, because it shows you how the river went and the boundaries here. So any questions? I don't bite. Hold on.
That mural is beautiful. Can you put it back on? And what's the name of the artist?
Oops.
You talk about it and let me do the tech.
Okay.
Here, let's just swap
It's by Robert Dussault.
Is he from the?
He's from Isleta. He graduated from Isleta. He's based in San Rosario. He's a well-known artist. He's done a lot of work with murals and other type of paintings.
Joe, I can add one thing. You're going to see that wrought iron gate that's fixed. You can't actually go through it. But when we looked at the mural, we thought that this would be an ideal situation, have a student art challenge to design a wrought iron gate that would portray the mountains, the river, and the trail. And so that's how it looks now, but we also intend to have a very beautiful gate created and placed there in that position.
Okay, anyone else?
No, but thank you.
Thank you.